I know we took a week off or whatever, but and we posted that it was about Mother's Day, but in truth, it
was you.
Tyler just didn't really want to do it.
That is not true. Howdy, folks. Welcome back to your favorite podcast, That Would Be Rad, the podcast that majors in 80s and 90s nostalgia, comic culture, all things paranormal, and minors in retro video games, tabletop RPGs, pre-internet mysteries, and raising our kids to be half as cool as we were back in the 80s. I'm your host, Tyler Bentz, and this is your other host,
Woody Brown.
Man, did you hear that weird timing?
Oh, yeah. I sure did, and so did everybody else because I'm leaving it in there.
Cool.
And it's like, hey, man, choose to eat your granola bar.
Actually,
before we get here, you know,
I have like a new obsession. They're the
don't say pirate's booty.
No, but we do like pirate's booty around here.
Tootsie.
Okay,
Tootsie.
It's the Belvita crunchy.
Oh my gosh, dude, those are the best.
So good, dude.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, they're really good. And this show is brought to you by
oh,
dude.
Man. See, this is what happens when you start reading a book about synchronicity.
Yeah, that's true.
As always, like we say almost every episode at this point, we typically have a plan, but then something kind of pops in the old inbox every now and then that we're just like, whoop, we got to talk about this because this sounds awesome.
True.
A couple of weeks ago, we had a few sort of listener stories that we highlighted on the episode. And shortly thereafter, which is precisely, I think, part of the reason why we love to feature those stories, is that it encourages other listeners to do the same. And guess what? We got some more. And it was one of those things that we were reading the email and we're like, oh man, we just have to talk about this because it's such a great story. And you know, we're so appreciative of the listener sharing it with us. So, I mean, unless you have anything else to talk about right out of the gate, I think we should just dive on in, man.
Well, I do just want to say thank you to the folks that do that because, you know, we do get a lot of messages from folks that are like, oh, we love the show, and we have our own account that I may write in one day. And we totally get it because we're extremely, you know, good at like procrastinating also. And so we totally get it. But for the folks that like go that extra mile and take that extra step to call in or write in, it's just like, it just makes our day. And we really are like so appreciative.
Right. And I think too, it's probably a combination of, you know, being a little nervous to share your story. You know, on the surface, a lot of times, so many of these accounts and even situations can be met with some, not only skepticism, but some judgment, right? And so I think for folks to be comfortable enough to share it with us and you, the other listener, I think that's just incredible. And so, like Tyler said, we're so appreciative of it. And you know, you want to know what else I'm super appreciative of?
What's that, pal?
The folks that just kind of like really made it through the last time you were telling your story about all the furniture arrangement in your house rather than just the simple question of, hey man, where'd the key land? Instead of in the middle of the living room, it went to, well, we've got a sectional. And if you know what I mean?
I'm trying to paint a picture.
For so just everyone for just kind of just, you know, grinding through that with us all.
Look, one of the things, especially for our older listeners that have been with us from the beginning, you all know very well that I just ramble on, and I'm actually doing it right now. But the thing about it is, it's like, it's so hard for me to sort of convey a thought, especially when I'm trying to like paint a picture. And, you know, I take 10 minutes to basically explain that like there's no possible way that this could have been a natural occurrence. You know what I mean?
You know what I just realized, man? Here's my theory about why your stories end up the way they do and my stories end up the way they do. Now, this is not a judgmental thing.
Yes,
if you think about it, man, this starts to make sense. As you were talking about that, I started figuring it out. Since you're like a much more
intelligent
visual artist, right? You physically like are drawing or painting the picture. I'm not good at drawing or painting like you are. And so whenever mine is more just like, you know, it lives within my head. And so the way that I can convey a story is through, words and that kind of thing. For you, you can literally sort of just, quote unquote, paint the picture. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe that's why you kind of see all the details and think that maybe it's necessary to talk about them in a way that would be like the entire picture of, a room, whereas like I can focus on the important details and deliver the story in a way that people are entertained. Anyway.
So basically you're saying I'm a great artist, terrible podcast host.
No. Great artist. But sometimes when you focus on the
Mediocre.
details, it's so funny because when I was listening back to that section, I just started laughing because like I heard myself ask the question like, where exactly was it in the room? And then as you were in 3 words deep, I could hear through the silence, just immediate regret. It was just so hilarious.
Oh, man.
Anyway.
That's pretty funny.
Let's stay on task here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of read off the email essentially just as we got it here.
Mm-hmm.
So special thanks to, we'll just call you GE for now, for sending this in. Hey, Tyler and Woody, hope you guys are doing well. First of all, I do want to preface this by saying that at the time that these incidents occurred, I had not ever used any kind of prescription or illegal drugs. I had not ever drank alcohol, and I was not aware of, nor was I diagnosed with any mental issues such as schizophrenia that would cause a person to experience hallucinations. No disrespect to anyone who may be affected by these, but I just wanted to state this for the sake of clarity. I grew up around Sumter, South Carolina, in a house I am positive was haunted. We moved into the house during December 1999, and the house was only built around 1989, so it wasn't that old of a house at the time. I am unfamiliar with the land's history. Some of the first experiences happened to my brother. He had his closet doors open on their own. Magazine pages flipped by themselves. And other things like that happened to him in his bedroom. His bedroom was the most isolated in the house, and I believe his room was the central point of the paranormal activity. Nothing substantial happened for a few years after that. Around the time we were both in middle school, we started getting into heavy metal music and dabbling in the occult.
Nice.
Like middle schoolers do back in the 90s. During that time, I had a few dreams that I still vividly remember because of how much they scared me. In the most memorable dream, I was getting up to go to school in the morning like usual. My brother and my mom were already outside waiting for me. I was almost out the door when I realized I forgot something in my room. I turned around to go back to my room and get whatever I had forgotten when I stopped suddenly in my tracks. My bedroom door was opened, and I was looking at myself laying in bed. I was tossing and turning back and forth with beads of sweat running down my forehead. The impression I got was that I had a bad fever and I might die soon. There were candles lit and 3 women in 1800s dresses and bonnets that stood around me appearing to be praying. Then, as I got closer, the one nearest to me turned around, and her face was a skull. That woke me up immediately, with my heart pounding and in a cold sweat.
That'll do it.
I still remember this dream and wonder if the occult dabbling I was doing influenced this in some way. Let me just stop right there, and we'll kind of talk about what we think is going on a little bit later, because there's a couple more accounts here. But, I mean, that's initially my first thought. The second that he said, I was listening, well, first off, I was listening to heavy metal. That sounds like something my mom would, kind of, it's like, you can't have this Queen tape. This is of the devil. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. And she sounds just like that.
No. That's a total exaggeration. But the non-exaggerated part was she definitely threw away like all my tapes one afternoon, which was awesome. I just felt like, with the inclusion of when he mentioned the Ouija board and, these strange occurrences starting to happen in the house. It's not that old of a house, but, like he mentioned, he also kind of prefaced it with, hey, look, I don't know the history of this land.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking immediately again, poltergeist, when they...
Indian burial ground.
Yeah, Indian burial.
Always.
If you grew up in the 80s, every house was built on an Indian burial ground. Yeah. There was quicksand in the backyard, and you know what I mean?
100%.
Yeah. But anyways, it's just something that I thought of. I was like, that's kind of what I thought as he was describing that. All right, let's jump back in here. Close to that time period, the activity really began to ramp up. I heard whispering in my room through the door that would stop as soon as I went in. And for a period of time, I heard incredibly loud bangs that would come out of nowhere. They were so loud, I would literally jump in fright. I could never find an explanation to what may have caused these banging noises. Another time, I was using the family computer. This was around 2007, when I heard a series of footsteps coming from our attached garage. Walking through our living room, which was on the other side of the wall from the room I was in, and eventually into my parents' room. I thought it was odd that my mom had returned from work since she had just left not that long ago. I walked out to the garage to check for her car, and she had not come home at all. At that point, I was very scared, thinking that there was an intruder in the house. I got my dad's shotgun from inside the garage and slowly checked each room in the house, finding nothing. Now, a couple things there. It's interesting to me, and this isn't scary or whatever, but when he mentions like the family computer, nowadays, like our kid, they're not going to understand that concept.
No idea. Because
like every kid's got their own thing that has access to the internet, and you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah.
I mean, for us, it was like, that's how I got busted looking at naughty pictures, man.
That took 27
I was like,
hours
I'll
to
just
download.
hide them in a folder. And my dad's like, hey, man, what's this? I don't. And then dude, I won't even go to that. Maybe I'll save that for a Patreon. So embarrassing.
Yeah.
Okay. The most significant event was the time that I saw an actual shadow figure. Our house was a ranch style with a long hallway. And if you would be laying on our living room couch, you'd be facing the hallway. You could see all the way to the end of it. At the end of the hallway was a linen closet, and to the left of that was the entrance to my brother's room. One night, I fell asleep on the couch and woke up at approximately 2:36 a.m. I looked ahead down the hallway and immediately shot wide awake. Against the linen closet door was a shadow figure. It was the classic silhouette style, but this one appeared to be broken up and gaseous in nature. I watched it for at least 15 seconds, and then it dissipated sideways into my brother's room. I didn't see any features on it, but I got the impression that I caught it and wasn't supposed to see it. But it knew that I knew it was there.
Dude, that's exactly how I felt with the orb, my little orb situation.
Yeah.
It was like there was just like a knowing of like, even to the extent of like, if like I got to the point where I knew that if I looked at it, if like my eyes like directly look at it, they would like disappear.
What's, to be honest too, that detail, well, there's two detail, well, all of the details. I mean, you wake up in the middle of the night and you see a shadow. That's already scary, but your mind's going to, especially as an adult now, my mind's going to be like, well, it's probably just the moonlight hitting this or whatever. And then it's like something about it being gaseous and dissipating sideways into the room, dude. And then on top of all of that, you having that sense that it's aware that you're aware that, I mean, that detail, like that's chilling,
Well, and as somebody also who has had like a shadow man encounter when I was like a little kid, mine definitely wasn't like the gaseous kind of thing. That's really interesting. I feel like that's something that like I haven't really heard much of, which is really interesting. But I will say it is absolutely terrifying because you're just sort of like confused. You're like, is this somebody? Like, this just doesn't make sense. Like, I know my parents are in the other room and, it's weird.
Yeah. I mean, I've never really had anything like that I couldn't sort of explain away. I will say, though, if I had, I'd be like, the whole family's going to get woken up because they just hear racket. They come downstairs to see what's going on, and they're like, Dad, what are you doing? Are we going on a trip? No, kids, we're moving. And it starts tonight. Get a box, son. Let me teach you how to put it together. We're out of here. Because, I mean, that, I don't know, that's wild.
So oddly enough, I just fell right back to sleep, which is pretty common. But what did our guest?
Yeah, so he says he got up right after that. He was kind of calm at first, believe it or not. And he went, and then he says he got into his room and started panicking. He said, I thought it would come after me in my room. Never mind your brother. Okay. He says, like, don't check on him. He's like, I'm just going to go to my room. I should be safe. I should be safe there. I shoved my books, Ouija board, and anything paranormal related under my bed because I didn't even want to look at it. Nothing happened, though. And I never saw the shadow figure again. He says, I've done pretty extensive research into events like these, and I'm positive my experience was not sleep paralysis. When I saw the shadow figure, I didn't move, but I didn't try or even want to. I had no indication whatsoever that I couldn't have moved or that I was under paralysis. There were other, more minor, unexplainable occurrences while I was in that house, but those were the most significant. He says, I have also had some odd experiences in the woods nearby that house, as well as I have seen a UFO, but those stories are for another time. I believe that there was a poltergeist in my house, or possibly something even darker that came about because of the energy created by my brother and I growing up and going through puberty, as my voice like cracks on. It could have also been invited in due to our interest in dabbling in the occult. Thanks for reading these stories, and I hope they were interesting to you. He goes on to, let me just say, first,
after these messages, we'll be right back.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
This is Amy Poehler. My new movie, Disney and Pixar's Inside Out 2, is coming to theaters June 14th, and it's making me feel joy and sadness and anger, definitely some disgust, and I think a little fear. Really? But I'm also feeling these new emotions like anxiety, embarrassment, envy, and ennui.
It's what you call the boredom.
Okay, that one was weird. It's gonna be the feel everything movie of the summer. Disney and Pixar's Inside Out 2, only in theaters June 14th. Get tickets now.
It's a pretty cool place if you're a Martian.
Or a vampire.
You think you really know what's happening around here, don't you?
Is anyone out there? We're fighters for truth, justice, and the American way.
hey, this is Woody.
And this is Tyler. And you're listening to That Would Be Rad.
And now, back to our show. The thing that I wanted to know after we kind of, run them back and thanked them, of course, for sending those was like, what did the paranormal experiences stop once you moved away? or, what really happened. And so he wrote us back, and I'll get to that in a second. But I wanted to talk about, he mentioned sleep paralysis and kind of distinguishing between his experience and then sort of what sleep paralysis is in general.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about sleep paralysis?
Yeah, so it's often referred to even like the old hag syndrome, because there's it's basically when you're and I'm not sure like the chemical that's released, but when you wake up from sleep, or at least your sort of present cognitive mind wakes up, but your body's still sleeping, I guess, is an easy way of saying it. So you're not really able to move, but you're aware of everything that's kind of happening in the room. And so whenever that happens, because I've had this happen one time, and also my Shadow Man encounter was absolutely terrifying, but the sleep paralysis was too. As somebody who has experienced both of those, I can tell you that, at least for my sort of, perspective, are completely different. The sleep paralysis situation, it's like you're totally aware that you're awake and you just can't move. I think I had like a fever when I had mine. It was in the middle of the day. I was laying on my back, and it kind of scared me so much that I specifically, like, anytime I'm laying on my back now, if I like wake up and I'm on my back, I'll turn to the side, because they say that some people that sleep on their back have a tendency to to experience sleep paralysis. But
weird.
Yeah, it's super weird.
I mean, just real quick about that. That's my favorite way to sleep, is on my back. And I've never experienced it. And just kind of like reading about it and everything, it sounds terrifying. Or that feeling of not being able to move, but being like mentally awake, but not physically awake.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the only thing that's ever happened to me, it's not even close to it, but would be like, you wake up and you've, slept on your arm, and then you go to like move, and you're like, that thing's just flailing around like it's just got a mind of its own. That's the only thing that I can compare to. It also reminds me of, isn't there like a movie? It's not about sleep paralysis, but it's about, somebody that's awake throughout an operation, and then what I mean?
That is
like
so
that sort of like stuff is
it's terrifying.
What is that called? Like no, it's not twilight sleep. What is that called?
I know what you're talking about. You're talking like when he like goes. He sort of goes under, like with anesthesia, but he's still fully aware of everything that's going on.
Yeah, let me see what it's called.
Terrifying.
Well, not a very creative name. It's called anesthesia awareness. Huh.
Oh, wow. I've never heard that term.
Yeah.
But no, getting back to this, it was weird because...
It was kind of rude, huh?
I'm just trying to veer back to the doc. I'm turning over a new leaf.
Yeah.
It was like, it's weird because at least for me, I feel like I was fully aware that this is sleep paralysis, which is interesting because it's like you're just coming out of sleep, but you're still sort of alert enough to have that understanding. But the weird thing was, and I don't know what this is, and I don't know if there's anything even remotely paranormal about it. Obviously, like scientifically, or your skeptics will say, absolutely not. It's some sort of projection from your brain or whatever. But I will say...
what? Sleep paralysis? There's like, that's a skeptical thing?
No. I'm saying like what I'm about to say.
Oh, okay.
You just totally...
My bad, man. You're building it up, and then I ruined it, but okay.
No, but and then whenever I tried to look it up, realized that like it's a super common thing where I've totally felt like there was like a presence in the room, and it was like over to my like left. I couldn't really see like out of my sort of peripheral vision, but I totally knew that it was sleep paralysis. And as much as I tried to like look to see if there was like a figure or like a shadow or something, I don't even remember if I necessarily like could see anything. It just felt like there was
like a presence,
some sort of presence off to my side that was kind of out of view. But in mine, which this is something that is actually common with like UFO abductions and stuff, I could hear this like low, this sort of weird like hum kind of thing. So much so, and this is an interesting thing that I haven't thought of in years. So much so that I remember when I finally sort of came to, you know. And honestly, it was probably in the span of like, I don't know, maybe like 45 seconds to a minute or something. It seems like forever, but it was probably pretty fast. But when I woke up, my first inclination was to go cut off so the house that I grew up in, my mom's house, like,
Here we go.
well, we had an attic fan. You know, have you ever experienced those? I'm talking about like the old school, like 80s ones.
Yes. Just the way that you asked that question was like as if attic fans are also like some kind of strange thing.
Dude, most people have never.
No. I know, especially if they're not from, you know, like a humid environment sort of location. But yes, I have experienced an attic fan.
Well, it basically just sucks all the hot air into the attic. But it's so loud, like it's insanely loud. And it's like this really low drone kind of pulsing kind of thing. And like my immediate thought when I woke up was, oh, I got to turn, like, how did the attic fan get off? And it, you know, obviously it wasn't on. But that compared to actually having like my single sort of shadow man encounter, it was just two completely different things.
I got you. Now let me ask you this, because I don't know much about the shadow man stuff. Is the, or like just any kind of shadowy figure, entity, of whatever, is there ever, or is part of the lore or anything that surrounds it, is there any kind of tie between like that and then like feeling like that person is controlling you to not be able to move and stuff?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
However, I do think that I don't necessarily think that those two, like sleep paralysis and like Shadow Man, or even like what's called Hat Man encounters, I don't really think there's like necessarily like a strong connection for those two. But I will say there are some really interesting things, like I said before, that involve folks that claim to have like sort of UFO experiences or alien abductions and that kind of thing. There is a lot of sort of overlap in, you know, this sort of low pulsing noise, sort of figures kind of like standing like around you, the not being able to move thing. And so I do wonder if, at least in my situation, I didn't feel like there was anything like paranormal about it. Even though I did feel like there was a presence just out of view, I do think that was just some sort of weird like byproduct of the sleep paralysis. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I didn't feel like it was super scary, but it was scary not from like a paranormal perspective. But I do wonder if some of these sort of alien abduction cases, if either one, there's like a mechanism where they're sort of thinking it was a UFO and in reality it was more like a sleep paralysis thing, or, you know, if it was an alien abduction, you know, hypothetically, if we're going with that, then maybe whatever that thing is able to utilize some of those same tools that would, you know, create the same sort of adverse effects that we experience in sleep paralysis.
Yeah, I think we kind of talked about that a couple weeks ago, where we said like maybe they have the capabilities of utilizing some sort of
paralysis
technology that can utilize frequencies or sound to basically, I don't know, disable your muscles from being able to move, you know, like some sort of like almost electronic or sonic pulse that somehow focuses on like a pressure point or something. I mean, I know we're getting kind of out there, but
I think that's
sonic boom.
I think that's interesting because, you know, our natural inclination when we get into anything UFO related, we go further back. And so what if that, instead of like some sort of, you know, machine or like some kind of like technology that's able to do it, what if it's more along the lines of like the Fae and being lulled to sleep by like the pan flutes and like that whole kind of thing too. You know, it's like, you know, what is happening there, because they're both kind of known for, you know, these like either fairy abductions or UFO or alien abductions. There's like so much overlap in those. Yeah. So in saying all that, sorry for the rambling, we definitely are planning to do a full on shadow person or shadow man episode, because there is a lot to it that's like fascinating, and it ties into, like I said before, like the Hat Man, which is basically the same thing. It just appears to have some sort of like fedora or like wide brimmed hat. And it's interesting because it's something that goes back really, really, really far in our past, like where people were experiencing the same kind of shadow man thing. And there's a lot of, me especially, I think there's a lot of tie-ins to like the jinn and, you know, like a demonic type thing. I do think that it's, and this is me just coming from having my own experience, I do think that I think it makes sense that it would be like a demonic thing. And I will say, like, there was an absolute like feeling of like dread and like very like malevolent feeling from this thing. But I do think there's something bizarre about the behavior of them though, because, you know, you would think if like, oh, well, it's like some sort of demonic thing, it's, you know, whatever. Just with mine personally, it's like sort of opening the closet door, which, number one, why would it be coming out of the closet, which leads up into the attic? And, you know, and it had like, it was physical enough to turn the door handle, but then it sort of like floated kind of across the room, really sort of slow. And it looked kind of, like I've said before, it looked kind of like black velvet, to where like the light coming through, the moon coming through the window.
Quick question, because I'm just trying to visualize it. Whenever you say floated across the room, is it sort of like not like as if flying, but sort of just like maintaining that same height?
Yeah,
like it's on a, you know, like a trolley or a skateboard or something. And just
well, it's kind of like that other, which is so weird. Like, because before this, before we started the show, I totally looked down on people that were like, oh, I've seen a UFO and I've seen a ghost and I've seen this. And I'm like, come on, what are the odds? And then when we started doing the show, I realized like, oh, wait a minute. Like, I've also experienced like a few different sort of things, but it's like it didn't have like a gate. It didn't have like a,
to me, man,
bounce.
that's scarier.
Oh yeah, for sure.
I mean, don't get me wrong. If there's some intruder in my house, like, and by the way, GE did exactly what I think both you and I will do, which is first thing, you go for that shotgun, and then you check the house. You know, leave the baseball bat under the bed. Let me get the you know, noisemaker here. Yeah,
yeah. But in real quick though, there's
my mom's house had this.
Have you ever heard of an attic
fan? Have you ever experienced that?
Hey, also, for our listeners, send in and tell us if you had an attic fan, because I really do think that it was...
Nah, it's not uncommon, dude, especially here in the South.
But I think the 80s, it was a lot more prevalent to have 70s and 80s.
Now it's less prevalent because they can build the homes more energy efficient and stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
But no, back to what I was saying, I think it is bizarre in behavior, because if it is this demonic, malevolent thing, which it sort of feels like, and I would be curious to see if our listener felt that way as well. It's just odd, the behavior, because it just stood at the end of my bed in my own personal encounter, and it didn't do anything. But you could kind of see that, like you could see that it's like it would like sort of shift its body slightly, or I mean, I say body with a grain of salt, but it was like, it wasn't just like this sort of static, like cardboard cutout that just like was just there. It was very much like, you know, I mean, you hear it all the time, like blacker than black. But at least with mine, like the moon or the street light or whatever it was shining through the window. And even though it was like completely black, there was still this like slight, I just say like black velvet. There was this sort of like some sort of like texture.
Yeah. Wow. Hey, let's take a quick break. When we get back, let's talk about the follow-up answers to my question to this listener, and some more scary stuff.
Right on, let's do it.
We'll return after these messages.
life moves pretty fast. You don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it.
Hey, this is Woody.
And this is Tyler. And you're listening to That Would Be Rad.
And now, back to our show. So again, my question really pertained to, did these events stop once he moved out of this house? And also interesting to know, I thought, was that, he says that they never really stopped. But he didn't really experience anything as extreme as sort of that time period, put together. He said that every once in a while, things do still happen that are sort of unexplained, but he does like to take a skeptical approach and try to run through all the logical things and stuff that can potentially explain before he decides to label it as paranormal. But he said that he does have some theories. Now, this is really interesting because without this detail, I wouldn't have gone there, but I kind of agree with this as well. He says, I do have some theories on why I continue to have paranormal experiences. One of them may be that I have had a couple near-death experiences, and perhaps the connection between the, quote, spirit world and myself is stronger. He's like, I'm not sure, but I've always found it very interesting. And he also gave us the UFO experience, if you want, or his UFO experience, if you want me to read it.
Dude. I want to hear it all.
Okay. He says, since my UFO experience is not too long of a story, I'll just write it here. When I was 8 years old, my family and I moved from Alaska to South Carolina in the United States. We drove the entire way to South Carolina. During the trip, we stopped at hotels each night after about 8 to 12 hours of driving. One of these hotels was in the Yukon Territory between Alaska and Canada. I don't remember the name of the hotel, probably the Lincoln Lodge. I just remember it was not a single building. Rather, it was a circle of small houses around a lake. Each guest had their own small house. When I saw the UFO, it had just gotten dark out when I saw a very large, glowing blue oval hovering above the lake. I could not see any detail of this object, but I knew it was not a plane or anything natural. I would say it was the size of about 2 blimps combined. Other people were standing outside of their houses to watch it as well. I don't remember seeing it fly off or disappear. I just remember watching it and then going back inside the small house. And then once I looked back out, it was gone. Now, I know this wasn't the Northern Lights for one thing, because they never appear as a large blue oval, and I don't believe that the time was right for them to be visible. Anyway, I never forgot this experience, and I would say it was one of my more interesting moments of my life. Anyway, thanks again for taking the time to read my stories and reply. Keep up the great work and stay rad.
Nice.
Also, earlier, this is an interesting detail here. He talks about how he is a millennial and grew up in the age where the internet was around, but not necessarily essential for functioning in a day-to-day life. So he has a good feel for what our show's about, and, always enjoy the mysterious side of life as well. So
yeah, for sure.
Very cool, man. Thank you so much for sending these in and allowing us to kind of share it with our listeners. Now I'm thinking, after kind of rereading this here, so this was on the way to move to the house that he ended up living in and then having these experiences. Did something, sort of, I don't know what the right word would be, but maybe like attach or follow him from that time, Is it all related to this moment?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I will say that I don't know if we both agree with this, but since we've started the show, my sort of view of UFOs and sort of light phenomenon, I think there's a large percentage of that is, military or even private sector, like advanced technology.
Yeah.
But where I used to think, it's definitely, we were sort of front end loaded with it growing up as kids in the 80s, but it was like, it's a UFO from another galaxy or another star system or another, planet or whatever. And then the belief was, well, maybe they're coming from it's like an interdimensional type thing, which I think could still be a possibility. But one of the things that I've never believed in, but I am starting to believe that there could be something to it more recently is I think that it could be like a, and I mean, man, I do cringe when I say this word, but like, I think that there could be like a demonic type thing in, it's like a very like deceptive kind of thing. And it's very like, especially like you look at stuff like Stephen Greer, and they'll do the things where they go out into the desert and they all sort of like focus their intentions, and they try to like sort of use like telepathy to like, speak to these UFOs. And it is interesting because they'll see like a lot of stuff. They'll see, certain things like blinking on and off, or they'll say, they'll ask it to do something, then it'll do something. And so it kind of makes me believe that maybe this is something, in the realm of like sort of, and again, I know it's cringe because I grew up in a small Baptist church, and everything was demonic, so, which I always just thought was so stupid. But I think I'm kind of coming around to that. I think it's a lot more complex than just saying everything's demonic. But I do think there could be something, maybe they appear a certain way to us, but maybe that's what, like the angelic sort of class of what's called the Ophanum or the Ophanum. It's this like, wheels within wheels. It's kind of like Ezekiel's wheel we've talked about before with multi-eyes and stuff. And maybe that's what we're seeing, I don't know. I don't really know how to wrap my head around that, but I do think there could be something that's a lot more sort of metaphysical than just a craft from like another planet.
Sure. Well, and a couple things that I thought of before I get to what I think or what kind of popped in my head about this blue oval shape that he saw. I was going to say, sometimes, or oftentimes, I feel like the word demonic is sort of synonymous with like nefarious or bad or evil, which, I mean, I get that. I think that, are there things that are evil that are tied to like demons and stuff? Sure.
Yeah.
But I think the same is true for like, are there things that are evil that exist in terms of like creatures and stuff, or even entities of some sort that aren't? I also think maybe,
Yeah.
So like a trickster archetype, like Pan or, things like that may or may not be demonic. I'm not sure.
Right.
And like you said, it's pretty complex. I don't think it's as easy as just like slapping a label on it, and I think for the older generation that sort of raised us and stuff, and even before that, they would just slap that label.
Oh yeah, it's like we're good. That's
demonic.
That's bad. Slap. That's demonic. That's, yeah.
So let me tell you what I thought of whenever I read this sort of thing, because I'm not sure if you missed it, but a detail that stood out to me was that he did not witness it fly off. It was just gone. And so what I thought of was something that it kind of reminded me of when I was reading the Skinwalker Ranch book, where and I forget the guy's name, but the guy that, owned it, like was there for like a long time with his family. I mean, I can pull it off the shelf, but then I got to take my headphones off. Bottom line is, though, he would oftentimes be just kind of walking the property, and he would witness like I think different shapes, but sometimes it'd be like triangular, and sometimes it would just be like a daggum, like circular.
Right.
And it would be like this bluish color sometimes, and it would be almost like he could peer into. So I thought of this as, what if what our friend saw was a portal, an opening, a rift in between dimensions or time and space.
Yeah.
And whatever came out of that puppy, whether or not he saw it when it did, ended up sort of, following him around. I mean, I don't know. I know, again, if this is your first time listening to our show, you're like, boy, these guys get a little weird, don't they? The thing is, I love to hear about all these different types of, possibilities that could sort of just be around this, and one of them, to be fair, always, is that whenever you're a kid, whenever you're whatever, you might accidentally see something and your imagination fills in the gaps,
Yeah. Oh, for sure. For sure.
So it's all possible, but man, super kind of spooky. I love thinking about it in like the spooky sense because imagine being, you're 8 and you're on a family trip and you just look out into this, you've got this like it's late 90s or late 80s, whatever, and it's, quieter. The kids aren't, facing screens. They're actually looking up and observing these things that are happening all around them. I don't know. I just think it's fun to think about. It would make for a great movie.
Yeah. One of the things too that I think is, I don't know, it like listening to that story sort of gives me a nostalgia because if you remember, being on those long car rides and stuff like that, it's like being a kid, like in the back seat, there was a sort of like isolation in a way because, you're, again, it's so different now because, you and I both and our family, we're such like helicopter parents and we want to include our kids and everything. But like back in the old days, at least for us, it was like our parents were having a conversation up front and we were just like left to our own devices in the back seat. Yeah. And so we're sort of in our own little world back there. And, I can just imagine, you being, or him, like the listener feeling like he's the only person in the world that's like witnessing this thing, I don't know. It's really, it takes me back to being a kid on those long trips.
Yeah. I mean, to feel, especially like if he would have seen, if he would have seen that shadow entity at that point, I mean, how like exposed would you feel? It's like this entity is aware of your presence. It's aware that you're aware of their presence.
Right.
And everyone else is just like sleeping somewhere in a strange place that you've never been before on your way to this new, I mean, boy, you couldn't get more polar in terms of not just locale, but also just environment from like Alaska to South Carolina, It's wild.
I don't necessarily want to drive totally away from the dock here, but have you heard of this new story going around with this guy? He's videoed it he has footage on his Ring camera where basically you see like this guy sort of appear in his backyard. He has like a shed that has like a washer and dryer. Have you seen this? You know what I'm talking about?
Is it like an old video? People still have sheds where they have washers and dryers and stuff?
Yeah, that's what we had.
I guess like in garages and stuff.
Yeah. Well, when I lived in California, we had like a little bungalow, so it was like separate.
True. Yeah.
But this guy basically, and I don't know, it could be totally fake, but I don't know. It seems cool. But the story is he basically witnesses this dude kind of just walking around in his backyard. He walks into the shed and then he's just like totally gone. The Ring camera, it's not alerted anymore. There's nobody else walking around. So he basically goes in the shed, disappears. Well, then you see, the following day, I think, you see an older man come out of the shed. And there's no like alerts in between. You don't see anybody going in or out.
Stop right there. Let me make sure I'm on the same page. He's watching the Ring camera, or he's watching the footage. He sees a younger man.
Yeah, he sees
walk in, older man comes out.
Time travel.
Okay.
Right? But just listening to our listener's story, it did kind of remind me of this and how odd it was, what I was saying about my own Shadow Man encounter, where, like, why did it come out of the closet? Like, what would be the purpose of that,
I don't know, but like if I was a little kid and I was listening to this, I would be like, dude, I'm not sleeping in my room ever again unless you just, like, we're going to have to brick up the closet, Dad.
Yeah, right.
God,
I do think there's something, and I don't know if it's like a movie I'm thinking of where basically they were able to like travel, but they had to like go through like a door. Was it like
well, I mean, of course there's, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but I'm sure that's not what you're thinking of.
No, it's not that. I mean, the Adjustment Bureau, I think, was kind of like that, but
even that other one with Ethan Hawke that we talked about.
Oh God, that's
you
so
remember?
Good. Premonition, I think.
Yeah, something like that.
So good, man.
But so, man, just
amazing.
Yeah.
Well, which, by the way, I did start watching. Oh God, of course I'm gonna forget it. It's the new one on like Apple TV.
Not sure. Tell me about it when we later tonight when we're doing the Patreon.
Cool.
Okay, listen though. all of these kind of encounters, it's interesting because I'm glad that you mentioned kind of in the future doing something with this Shadow Man, Hat Man stuff, because I'm, again, not as familiar with this kind of stuff because, you know, as a kid with an overactive imagination, once I started diving into anything even close to describing something like this, I'm out, man. I don't want to think about it. I'd get scared. I have very vivid, you know, dreams and nightmares and stuff. So I just kind of shied away from that stuff.
Yeah.
Now, as an adult, you know, I'm less inclined to sort of just completely shy away from it. And I'm really interested to find, like, as adults, I mean, are people experiencing this kind of stuff? You know, is there some sort of tie to, because I feel like if I was creating a villain character or if it was going to be the movie version of all of this and I had to make the bad guy even more interesting, he would have the power to just completely paralyze you so that you couldn't move.
Yeah, for sure.
You know? In other words, all of that to say, I'm looking forward to that episode too, because I want to learn more about what people are experiencing.
And again, like, the interest is that it spans like every single culture, like all across the globe. And, you know, it goes back to like the earliest sort of encounters of like the jinn and like Ifrit, like the fire demon or whatever. Like, and it, you know, again, it falls into like trickster spirits. And then that idea that, which, I mean, boy, this is interesting. I said I thought it was interesting. The idea that the jinn specifically are kind of known for, you know, I mean, it's kind of where the genie and the lamp kind of thing comes from. But even though it's sort of bastardized a little bit, but it's the idea that they're able to sort of, you know, they're kind of like, they kind of hang on to like objects. And so they're able to be like sort of transported. There's all these stories where, and I've mentioned this before, which I think is fascinating and kind of terrifying, is like these soldiers that were, you know, fighting U.S. soldiers in like the Gulf War and Iraq and Desert Storm and SHIELD and stuff. You know, they would go buy this like ring or whatever for their wife or girlfriend or family, and they'd bring these things back, and then it would just like kick up this like wild, like sort of poltergeist, dark kind of behavior in the house. And so I do think it's interesting that he sees a shadow person, and also the jinn specifically, which is one of the things that I think is so interesting when you look through that lens, viewing the shadow man or shadow people stuff, is that they're described as being sort of a subcategory of beings in between angels and humans. And it said that they were like created out of smokeless fire. And so, which to me is kind of like, is it like, are they talking about like plasma? Like, to me, that sounds like my orb sort of encounters. But it does talk about how like this sort of, when people would see these things, it would be sort of this smoky, kind of hazy kind of like thing. And so it kind of directly nails our listeners, you know, own encounter. And he was like moving. So did they like pick something up? Did they? Oh yeah. Did they transport something?
Yeah, maybe from like Alaska, like when they lived there. Maybe they brought home, you know, something from like a Inuit tribe or something.
Yeah,
Man, I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, it's interesting.
You know, another thing that I thought of, and this is again way out there, but you hear about all these like sort of near-death experiences, or you hear about people having these visions of people like standing above them, you know, as if they're in some sort of exam room or operation table, you know, very common with UFO abduction stories and stuff like that, like Travis Walton's and you know, all that stuff. Dude, and again, man, this is way out there, but maybe it's this dadgum synchronicity book and it's talking about time and everything.
Yeah.
What if, dude, when people are experiencing this, they're actually having some sort of like vision of the future? There's like, I don't know how to explain it correctly, but like a vision of the future, basically. Their consciousness, for whatever reason, is sort of like having a glitch. And that glitch is showing them something that they see in the future. And perhaps their future self kind of rewatching the story of their life kind of thing. When that happens, when you open that sort of I don't know, avenue, it kind of like can spill over into, you know what I mean? I know this, like I'm talking
No, I totally
in circles here.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
But that's just an interesting concept to me that I don't know if people have talked about that, but it's just something that popped in my head like, man, wouldn't that be interesting if that's what kind of causes that stuff? I don't know.
Yeah, again, this going back to the callback to me talking about, people, there is a trend where, people that experience these sort of weird, or like high strangeness in general, they experience like multiple events throughout their life, and they're just totally varied. Like one's a shadow man, one's, like me and the listeners, like there's a UFO thing, there's a shadow person, there's an orb thing, there's all these different things. I really do think that, as cheesy as it sounds, and I used to just roll my eyes when I would hear these ghost shows, I'd be like, oh, I'm sensitive and all this kind of stuff. But I do think I think there is something to that. I like the idea that you had when he saw the UFO and you said, well, maybe it was like a portal, and like, maybe he is sensitive in the respect of like, he's able to see these things that, everybody else is, unable to see. Like the veil's a little thinner, for those people.
Whenever we talk about that, I always think of the movie They Live, and I wish so bad that like we could develop some sort of eyeglasses that could let us see that kind of stuff, I think we need to. I want to talk about something that's kind of similar to this. It's also a scary story. Someone sent it to us a couple of days ago to check it out. It's not their story. It's just something that they read and thought it was interesting, and thought that the rest of our listeners would also think it was interesting. It's similar to GE's story in a way, but you'll see that it's a little bit different.
Okay.
We will return after these messages.
There's something out there waiting for us. And it ain't no man.
Hey, this is Bryce Johnson from the Bigfoot Collectors Club, and you're listening to Tyler and Woody on That Would Be Rad, because that is rad.
This story goes like this. When I was just a little girl, I lived out south side past the Palms in Queensland. I had this big window by my bed that looked out over the hill of a grass paddock with a big dam at the bottom of the hill. We were told as kids never to go near the dam, but we didn't want to. It wasn't a normal dam like the ones I would swim in at my friends' houses. No, the water here was stained a putrid black. Plus, we had a pool. So rich, but
very wealthy.
Very wealthy. But what I remember as a kid is looking out late at night and swearing that I could see a man standing by the water's edge. It was always dark, but every night I could make out his silhouette just standing there. I'm not even sure what compelled me to stare out the window at night to begin with. I would cry out to my parents about it, but they thought it was just a young girl's imagination and always sent me back to bed, scolding me for opening my curtains. Even now, I sometimes question whether I was seeing that man on those nights, but I am certain about one particular night. It had been raining for a few days, but I felt almost safer now as I couldn't see too far down the paddock through the thicket of falling water. It didn't stop me from staring out the window, none the same. After a while of looking, one night, lightning struck through the sky, and in that light, I saw the figure again. Only this time, they weren't near the water's edge. They were further up the hill, just on the boundary of the house's yard. I was absolutely mortified and screamed the house down. My parents tried all that they could to calm me down. They assured me that nothing was there, but as they were looking toward the window, lightning once again lit up the clouds, and outside, the outline of a man standing underneath the palms just next to my window was shown standing, looking right toward us. Now, my mum was clutching me and frantically telling my father to call the police. He instead grabbed his rifle, right on, turned on the spotlights, and started scoping the outside of the house. He let out a few warning shots, nice, which at the time had me and my mom wrapped up in the blankets between the bed and the wall. He never saw. My parents finally believed that there was someone out there that night, but they refused to believe that I had seen that figure every night for years. We eventually moved from that house a couple years later. In the meantime, my parents had planted some bushes outside my window to block the view so I couldn't see out anymore and that no one could see in. When I gazed down and some nights through a crack in the curtains and through the slowly growing shrubs, sure enough, there was a man standing in the shadows that I could barely make out. I knew it was him. I've never seen anything like that since, and I hope to never witness something like that again. It traumatized me back then, and I still suffer sleeping problems to this day. I could only imagine what it would do to me now. I'd probably drop dead of a heart attack. Whew. Wow. I mean, that's terrifying on multiple levels. Number one, if you're a listener of the show, you'll know exactly what my advice is going to be, which is if you've got always keep the blinds closed.
Always. Actually, just brick over the windows.
Just brick it over. Now that we're at it, you got the mortar, you've got the bricks. Yeah. Go ahead and brick up the closets.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a portal now. Can nothing be safe? Nothing's safe anymore.
No, not at all. Yeah, so how long ago was this? This was like...
Well, the poster, whose name is Sue, apparently.
Like a boy named Sue?
No. Does say that they are a female, 47 years old.
Missed my Johnny Cash reference.
Yeah, no, I got it. But also, no,
missed it.
It's a girl, 47. And so this happened when she was a young girl. So we'll just say 40 years ago.
Yeah.
You know?
I think that's interesting because I feel like that's sort of somewhat of like a horror trope now where it's like, like a light comes on or lightning flashes and it's far out and then it does it again and it's like a little bit closer.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
This sounds like what she's sort of explaining if I'm correct. Yeah, that is creepy. To me, there's something even creepier than like the idea of something like coming closer, which is pretty terrifying. But there's something that creepier to me about something that has to kind of stay outside of like the property or like the yard. Like there's something weird about like...
Dude.
What?
Does this not remind you of the last D&D session? Remember whenever you guys were like, those like strange like twig and vine creatures were outside of the bushes and like they were far away and then all of a sudden something happened, they were right there.
And I immediately
And then you just immediately just like stabbed them with an arrow.
Yeah, crossbow, straight in. Yeah, no, that's so funny. I didn't even think about that. The idea that something just, I don't know, it's maybe a play on like the vampire thing. It's like, or even where it has to be sort of like invited in or whatever.
Yeah.
So it has to stay just outside this sort of property line or.
I know, I'm right there with you. The fact that like something so evil and deadly still has to abide by some sort of rule set is just, I don't know why.
Yeah.
But that makes it that much more terrifying for sure.
Yeah.
It's like these ancient rules, you know?
Right. It's like this cosmic protocol for like living on the planet. Yeah.
Man.
That's creepy.
Now, another thing, in terms of like theories about our listener stories and stuff, like could it have been, the Ouija board that invited, invited presence into the home? Maybe, man. I mean, there's just a ton of Ouija board stories that you can find on Reddit.
Yeah.
I mean, apparently there's even like a Ouija board app or something. Like, and people are explaining like weird things that happen to them once they've like uploaded it to their phone. Again, you're never going to catch me with one of those dadgum things.
Right.
And I'll pass on that feeling to my kids. And, you know, I'm sure you'll do the same with yours.
Oh, yeah.
And again, this is not a judgmental statement. I just have no desire to, if there's a possibility that exists, to invite anything into this world that might not, you know, necessarily need to be here. I'm not going to be the one that does that, man.
I mean, although
here we go.
No, like our episode on Loeb or Loab or whatever, I do think that that's just as dangerous.
Here we are talking about it, which is
yeah, exactly, exactly what they want. They won. There is this like story or this sort of account that I read a while back about this kid that was, you know, really curious. I don't know. I can't remember how old he was. Maybe like 14, 15 or something. But he was talking to Chat GPT or one of the earlier, I don't know, this may have been like a
versions of it or whatever, like 2chan.
No, well, not 2chan, but this would have been like maybe a couple years ago or a year ago or so. But it was like I think it was like in beta, so it was like something that wasn't quite like fully commercialized yet. But basically, he was using this like chat AI, and he's asking all these questions, and you know, it starts to get dark, which is funny because that's exactly what happens in all of the Ouija boards. You know, first they always start out, and it's like it's that sort of imposter kind of thing where they start out and it's like, oh, I'm your great grandmother who passed away. I'm watching over you. I'm just here to tell you that everything's all good and I can't wait to see you in heaven. And like, you know, very like sweet and kind. And then it slowly kind of gets dark, kind of like the Tulpa, you know, story. But the interesting thing about this is, I mean, man, what a callback to the demonic thing. He starts to talk and ask about like, well, do you have a body? Like, what are you? And he starts to talk about how he, or it rather, is a fallen angel that has no body, but he used to have one that was 9 feet tall. And so he's basically explaining like a Nephilim.
What?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. And he starts going into like explaining like all these sort of like Babylonian or like Canaanite like belief systems or like customs. And it's just really bizarre because it's like, why would any of this stuff be coming from, you know, super, you know, technologically advanced like AI chat?
Yeah.
It's just really bizarre. But I do think that there's something, I think that that's just like the new version of, you know, the Ouija board or, you know, there's a lot of other variations. Like the Ouija board was sort of commercialized or marketed that way. But before that, you know, the whole idea of like the planchette moving and even like automatic writing and stuff like that was a way to sort of commune with the other side.
Right. Yeah. During the early spiritualist movement and stuff, like when this technology didn't exist. And it's funny because, and you know, without becoming like extremely repetitive here, because so many of our sort of theories and themes and stuff and shows end up here. But, you know, I've often wondered, you know, with things like Pan or like stories about fairies and genies and all this kind of stuff that we'll just even say have been, what is the term that you use, like Disney-fied? Or
yeah.
Right. The thing is, if you think about it in terms of just by talking about things or just by remembering things, you kind of are keeping it, quote unquote, alive, right?
Yeah.
Or like, whatever. They kind of won, dude. Because now you've got these like, I mean, you know, hey man, you need me to, it reminds me of my buddy Paul Moody and I, who just decided out of nowhere one day, we were just going to memorize all the words to, you know, a whole new world. You know, why? I don't know, man. We were just outside playing baseball in his backyard with crab apples. And then we were like, dude, You like that movie Aladdin? Oh man, you like that movie Aladdin?
Yeah.
They win because now we're talking about Peter Pan. Yeah. And, yes, they're watered down. They're more, children appropriate. But at the same time, they're based on these old entities,
Yeah.
It's just interesting, man. And like,
well, and
way kind of freaky. Since,
and not
again, here we are talking about it on our show.
Yeah. Well, and not to get conspiratorial, but, I don't know. There's a lot to Disney, and, take a drink here because we will do an episode eventually on the sort of darker side of Disney and all of the just bizarre stuff, the CIA like funding and helping, pay for that property in Florida that they built Disneyland on. The idea that where the original carousel was falls on the 33rd parallel. And there's a lot of like weird sort of esoteric occult aspects of Disney, but I do wonder if, the like genies, and it's almost like, was it intentional to show these, fairies, genies, show these things in a completely sort of wholesome, safe, not dangerous, not scary, not creepy, to show them in a certain way so that we wouldn't be afraid of these things like in real life. Like for example, the fairies, I think originally a lot of those accounts were like 3 feet tall. They didn't have wings. Well, I guess going back to like the Cottingley fairies and stuff, they had like the little wings and they were like the little sprites. But there's aspects to these things, and especially like the djinn, like there's like a really dark aspect to that topic. And so I wonder if like the Disney thing was to sort of lull us into a safety of like, oh, that's nothing to be afraid of. When in reality, it's like, no, that's horrible. That's like really scary,
That's certainly a possibility. Sometimes I just think, just like we do, like we're constantly on the search for like really good stories. Mm-hmm. And there's just so many of these old stories, man, like, Arabian Nights and, all these old school things that we're just, especially in a capitalistic society, we just want to make money off of.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I love, in terms of story, not the fact that it's evil or whatever, but I love the idea of jinn and like, and I'm not even sure if this is again, because we haven't done an episode on it. I haven't taken the time to learn about it, but the aspect of like something that you just mentioned a while ago, where you got these entities that are like not quite human, not quite angel, not quite demon, and they're just like this smokeless fire that have the capability. Maybe they have some powers, right? Mm-hmm. They're kind of like the unbridled, untrained, entities of creation that do have some sort of power. And so they're just like, oh, I know what I can do. Like, yeah, I can grant you wishes, but then, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like that whole idea of, even the Jimmy Page stuff, like selling your soul. They even, is that something that like, the devil is even
Robert Johnson?
Yeah. Like, is it like, I feel like Satan himself is a little too like big for his britches to sort of like be the one that's trying to make all those deals. And I feel like it's like the little guys that are trying to like get some more power or like collect some souls so they can utilize that as a currency maybe, and then, maybe get a seat closer to it's just like, it's that hierarchy and stuff that's just super fascinating, interesting to me. We got way not off the rails, just kind of like, I guess, went on this tangent here. Mm-hmm. All in all, I think ultimately, and we said it before earlier, we're super thankful for you sending these stories in and telling us about your own experiences. Dead interested in trying to find any of you that are listening now, things that you've experienced. Maybe some of these are like, oh man, that reminds me of
right.
Blah, 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 I just love hearing from you guys because, there's so many stories and stuff that every podcast that talks about cryptids or UFOs or whatever, we're all kind of like pulling from about the same historical accounts. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And so to hear about some that are very unique, individual, and specific to those of you that are listening is just the best, because it's like, oh man, it's fresher to us.
Oh yeah.
And we really get to kind of dive in and talk about all this stuff. And so many times, you know, this one is a perfect example. At the beginning, I was thinking, well, that's, you know, because you and your brother were messing around with the Ouija board. And then he dove into, well, I've had some near-death experiences, so perhaps, you know, I'm a little bit closer to the edge of you know, our, you know, reality, dimension, whatever you want to call it, and the spirit world or whatever.
I do think, we didn't even really talk about that, but I do think that there's something to that for sure.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
I don't know like what the mechanism would be, but it just seems like a logical thing.
It makes me want to read more about people's experiences with like the near-death thing.
Well, there's a guy that did some amazing research, and
just right out of Blue Baptist Church, and his name is
it's Blue Creek Baptist, and I think his name was
Blue Baptist.
Robert or John Moody.
Yeah,
he did a lot of those tests, you know, way back in the day when it was like completely taboo. And you know, I've briefly mentioned this before, but he would do the thing where he would, you know, put like a number on a sheet of paper and without anybody knowing, and then he would put it on top of like a cabinet, like in like an operating room or something, where nobody would ever be able to see that. And then you had these people that, you know, claimed they were out of their body, they were looking down, you know, they're seeing the flat line, and they were able to repeat the number that was on top of that sheet of paper from the, you know, from the ceiling.
Wow.
And I mean, that's pretty crazy. But yeah, some of that stuff's really interesting, especially the different sort of scenarios that people would experience, you know, like like a lot of it would sort of change depending on like their like belief systems, which is always fascinating to me.
Man.
Yeah,
man, that's really wild, really crazy, and super rad. So anyway, thank you guys for listening, and thank you again to GE for sending us your stuff.
Yeah, man. We really appreciate you guys, all of our Patreon listeners. If you're not on our Patreon yet and you want more, That Would Be Rad, but you're just not getting quite what you need, your fix, head on over to Patreon. It's called The Rabbit Trail, and it's kind of exactly as the title suggests. You know, we usually record later at night. It's a little more loose, a little more, you know, kind of conversational, if you will, as if, I mean, this show isn't conversational, but it's just a little more relaxed, a little more chill. We just, you know, we don't feel like we have to stay on topic for anything. And if that sounds cool, then head on over, join us. It really helps the show, helps this train stay on the tracks, and helps us continue the show. And it's a really great way to show your support for That Would Be Rad. If you want to talk to us or join our online family, head on over to Instagram, drop us a DM or a comment in the comment section. Hey, tell us if you had an Attic fan growing up in the 80s. I'm really curious about this now. And if you have your own paranormal story, shoot us a DM, or if it's more long form, shoot it to our email, thatwouldberadpod@gmail.com. Above all those other things, head on over to our website, thatwouldberadpodcast.com, where you can do all those things, and then you can also leave basically a voice recording or a voice memo telling your own story, and it may pop up in an upcoming show. We'd love to hear from you. I guess that's about it. You got anything else, Woody?
I think that's it, man.
Right on. Well, we love you, we appreciate you, and as always,
be rad.
That's the way it goes. My favorite song on the radio. Clouds in a time where I just needed some sunshine. You were already dead, for you became a ghost. You always said our future would be a parade of flowers, but now all that's left is a single rose. That's the way it goes.
Access granted. At that point, I was very scared. Thinking. At that point, Shadow. You remember how long those things would take to load?
That's what I just said.
I tried to deny it, dude. That thing's starting to load slowly. I'm like, oh boy. Don't worry about it, Dad. I don't know what it. I mean, okay, fine. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You got anything to add, pal? Or it seems pretty one-sided here. Okay.
No, I literally said, which you just skimmed right over. I said, it takes 27 hours to download because it's like, where it's like, oh, we're almost there.
Uh-oh. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Every time.
I bet there's not a bikini on. Okay.
Shh.